Hello everyone, it's lovely to be here. This is a talk I delivered at Oyne Parish Hall last week for the Geary Carriage Driving group for their winter meeting. I'm re-recording it at home to send to people who weren't able to be there. Within the broad theme of 70, I'm going to share an overview of the history of carriage driving within the RDA, a little of my personal history, what I do when I'm not in my red t-shirt, and a roundup of last year's moments with Mary. There's an overview of overall theme of 70 because it was my 70th birthday last month, but you'll be relieved to hear I haven't thought up 70 moments for you. I want to begin with a concept, the experience we have on a Wednesday or a Thursday. It's alive and enlivening for all members of our group. It's not theoretical, it's practical. We have the horse and all the accompanying sensory input. We meet the people, we smell the farm, we feel the grooming, the weight of the harness, the clanking of the carriage, how it all works, the weather, the cleaning materials, the tea and coffee within a wonderful landscape. It's an embodied experience, not an abstract one. Charles Dickens gives us a clear example of the difference in hard times. The horrible teacher, Mr. Gradgrind, is in front of the class. "Now what I want is facts," he says. "Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are what are wanted in life. Nothing else will ever be of service to them. This is the principle upon which I bring up my own children. Girl number 20, give me your definition of a horse." Sissy Jupe is thrown into the greatest alarm by this demand, even though she knows her father's horse well. "Girl number 20, unable to define a horse," says Mr. Gradgrind. "Bitzer," says Thomas Gradgrind, "your definition of a horse." Bitzer, a boy, replies confidently. "Quadruped, gramnivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth, and 12 incisive, sheds coat in the spring, hoofs hard, but requiring to be shod with iron, age known by marks in mouth." "Now, girl number 20, says Mr. Gradgrind, "you know what a horse is." Perhaps Gradgrind is related to me because I do think it's helpful to have some facts to help our understanding, especially some of the more archaic processes that are part of all that embodied experience that's RDA. So fear not, Moments with Wise Mary is here to help. Let's begin by going back 70 years to 1952 and a very important woman called Elizabeth. No, not the Queen, although I do believe she was doing something 70 years ago as well. Liz Hartle. Liz in 1952 won a silver medal for dressage at the Helsinki Olympics. She had polio and was paralysed from the knees down. She won against able-bodied competitors. And there was a push after that right across Britain to have therapeutic riding groups to encourage people with disabilities to ride. In 1969, the RDA was formed. In 1971, Prince Philip helped put together a rule book for the new sport of combined driving, with similar elements to ridden eventing. At the same time, Princess Anne became the patron of the RDA, and in 1975, carriage driving started as part of RDA, and now there are more than 80 groups. If you want to read more, this page is in your RDA handbook. Here is one of the early vehicles. We've moved on a little bit, but doesn't that look fun? I am also 70 this year, and I thought I'd share a little of my platinum history. I turned up unexpectedly on Pancake Day, around the time my parents bought this wonderful new tractor for their little farm in Cornwall. Dad had been ill and Mum was ploughing, and I came early. Apparently there was little in the way of baby things for me, and I had to be put in a drawer. I still like the smell of tractor diesel and the taste of pancakes. Here I am a couple of years later when the tractor had time to gain a little mud. Around about the time this picture was taken to show off my hat, I came home from school to hear horse noises from the lambing shed. I went in and saw 2 ponies. 2 ponies! I rushed into tea and said, thank you, I really wanted a pony, but I didn't expect 2. They're strays, said my dad gruffly. The owner's coming to collect them in a minute. I was crestfallen. But the pony owner ran lessons on a Saturday morning, and for 3 years I took 4 shillings in a matchbox to have lessons. Then, when I didn't seem to be giving up, we got a 12-2 grey pony that I had as long as I taught my brothers to ride and get the cows in. We all rode her. She was a character, and I learned a lot. I grew up. Somehow these slides have been turned around, so I'm growing down, but you can see the picture. Later, I went to Occupational Therapy College in Exeter. I'm in the front row, 3rd from the left. I met Chris, and I absolutely fell in love with his car. It was a Sunbeam Rapier, and we drove around the south of England. I was delighted. We got married in 1972, and as you see from the picture on the right, we've gathered a few cobwebs since then. We had 3 children, Tim, Lucy and Nick. Lucy loved ponies, and we bought Goldie for her. In 1986, we decided that Aberdeen would be a good place to settle. It was there I was able to revive my horsey skills, and while Lucy enjoyed her riding, we bought a 12-2 pony called Flax. And Chris and I learned the sport of carriage driving, and we nearly managed tandem. I met Ruth at a driving event around 1989, and she invited me to come along to the Geary group. At the time, they had little Honey and Tulip and Ruth's horse, Donnell. When Lucy left home, I moved away from ponies and I ran self-catering at home, and I went to art school. I wanted to be more creative. Art led me on to writing. And I found education strangely alluring. I belonged to a writers' group, and there I get to wear a skirt. I'm now halfway through a PhD in ethnology and folklore. I'm studying how grandmothers of geographically separated grandchildren are passing on their family story. Anyway, as I never say in real life, that's enough of me. Let's have another moment with Mary. Why is silage called silage? Of course, we know that the word hay comes from an ancient word meaning an enclosure for keeping grass, haj, from which we get the word hedge. But what is the word silage, and is it a new thing? Looking at an old book I still have from home, The Horse in the Stable and Field, published in 1892, it says, ensilage has come into use in recent years. Ensilage. So that's what it was called in the 1800s. And it turns out that ensilage means to store damp fodder in a container called a silo, away from the air where it will ferment. Apparently the first modern upright silo was made in Illinois in 1873 by a man called Fred Hatch to ferment and store maize for dairy cows. He was trying to improve on the pits he had heard about in Europe. These had been letting in water and rotting the plant material. He found that round silos were better than pits or square tanks because there were no corners, so there was less rot. Cattle could be fed and kept alive through the winter on this nutritious feed. The news had reached the author of my book, who'd heard of it by the time he was writing in the late 1800s. The ensilage process of storing slightly damp, wilted grass somewhere airtight converts plant sugars to organic acids in anaerobic conditions. It really pickles the fodder crop, so silage is pickled grass. At some stage, of course, ensilage dropped its on and became silage. Driving whips. The word whip comes from an ancient Latin word vip, or Low German vipjan, to shake or flourish. Dutch wippen means to swing. We've always used sticks to herd domestic animals. This picture by Glasgow boy James Guthrie is called The Goose Girl, and it's a treasure at Aberdeen Art Gallery. She's carrying a long stick for herding the geese. Sheep can be led, cattle can be prodded. A whippy stick has always been used to drive animals forward. A tree whip is a young tree for planting bare-rooted. The holly has particularly whippy stems. It's common and it's been traditionally used for a driving whip. It has knobs that anchors the thong, and at some point in our folklore history, the holly tree was considered to have a magical power over animals. A thong attached to the end, with a knot, achieves a crack. Animals instinctively shy away from a sharp sound, and if all the horses in a team hear a crack, they accelerate away together. If one horse is lagging, the whip can be used to touch a shoulder. The Long Man of Wilmington has 2 long sticks, useful for guiding or blocking animals. Driving cattle is different. They don't respond to the voice like horses, so a stick or pole is traditionally used on their rear ends. I could go on about the ancient management systems, the rod, pole and perch, and how a horse could in one day plough a furrow long, a furlong. But we'll move on to breeching. Breeching was first recorded to describe clothing to cover the loins. German bruch, Old English brech, Scottish breeks. Small children were dressed alike, as we see from Victorian pictures, and then they were breeched at a certain age after toilet training. The boys were put in a separated garment that reached the knees, and babies are considered to be breech when the hips come first. The dashboard, in front of our feet when we're driving. From the Swedish dashka, it is a board attached to the front of the carriage to protect the driver's legs from splashing or dashing from mud, water and stones. Dash means a small violent movement or hit. We don't use the word much now, although we do know dashing through the snow or dashing away with a smoothing iron. Now, like silage or ensilage, has been shortened for convenience to iron. Here is Lucy, our very newest member of the group, demonstrating the dashboard. The dashboard was transferred to the car, and being in the line of sight was the place for instruments, and then that was transferred to the computer and the icons instead of instruments. What I get up to when I haven't got an RDA sweatshirt on? Well, Here I am painting an octopus. I like upcycling. I made these gates from pallets for a friend's vegetable garden. I wrote a series of children's books about an octopus and a mermaid, about our local area at Balmedy. I like giving brown furniture a lift. This was a table that I bought with young Tim on my back in a rucksack at an auction in Cornwall. I think I bought it for £7, and we've used it for many years, but now it was no longer needed, and I've made it into a coffee table or a low table with little side tables. This was just for fun. During COVID, I had plenty of time, and I did quite a bit of colouring in on the top of this old blanket chest in a Celtic design. I used signatures of a mouse or a snail. This old sideboard I exhibited last year at Aberdeen Artists. I made it to look like ivory inlay, and around the top I wrote an apology to the natural world from the human race for using up all the materials in the world. This is a fairy door. I made a collection of fairy doors when I was in America last year. Back to more moments with Mary. Blinkers or winkers. These names come from slang words for eyes. They limit the view of the horse to prevent it from being distracted or alarmed by what's going on behind the shafts. As far back as the ancient Egyptians, we humans have deprived horses of their ability to see behind them, all the better to take advantage of their strength and willingness. A blinkered attitude is a slang term for having a narrow or limited outlook. Yoking. George Skinner might say, "Let's get yoked up," meaning harness up and get the carriage attached. Why does he say that? Well, the word yoke means to join. He means put the two together, join them. Dairymaids in illustrations of old nursery rhymes are seen carrying 2 buckets of milk from a wooden yoke across their backs. It aided the weight distribution. Horses and cattle are yoked together to work. By the way, the word egg yolk is from another word, an Old English word, yoka, meaning yellow. Living under the yoke is living with oppression. Before the collar was developed, a wooden bar connected the head and necks of draft animals. For oxen, there was a curved piece of wood arching over their heads. This was known as an oxbow, and in geography gave its name to the Oxbow Lake. This is, if you remember your geography lessons, where a river cuts through a curve and leaves a lake behind. The hansom cab. I like this image. It appears in Narnia, doesn't it? And the lamppost is left behind when it's a hansom cab and the horse are transported across to Narnia from London. It was a horse-drawn carriage designed in 1834 by Joseph Hansom, an architect from York, and it was designed to combine speed with safety, a low centre of gravity for safe cornering. It nipped through the traffic in London. Cab is a shortening of cabriolet, reflecting the design for the carriage, and it replaced the hackney carriage as a vehicle for hire, with the introduction of clockwork mechanical taxometers to measure fares, and the name became taxi cab. Hansom cabs were very popular as they were fast and light enough to be pulled by a single horse. They steered around London. The driver could manage the fares from the back through a window in front of his knees. The swingle tree is from the old name swingel, from the Dutch word for a tool beating flax, or a disused Middle English word for a wooden pole or tree. See saddle tree. Quite often, tree was used to describe a piece of wood. The swingle tree swings or pivots behind with the traces attached. It's one of the most useful inventions in our human progress. When a horse pulled a plough or a harrow or a binder, he pushed into a collar at walking pace. But for pulling a carriage after the roads were improved, the trot was the most efficient speed, and horses could be expected to trot for 10 miles before they were changed. But the diagonal gait meant that he would take the movement at the front, at the point he was pulling from. He would be chafed across his chest. After the roads were improved, as soon as the mail coaches were organised in the 1790s to take our letters to our loved ones, we decided to get on board and take ourselves to see them too. So the mail coach system was developed across the country. The swingle tree technology is also now in our windscreen wipers. What has Prince's Bottom got to do with the Space Shuttle rocket boosters? Well, the first roads were built by and for the Roman Empire in order to expand. They needed roads for transport. Soldiers had to travel. They travelled by horse-drawn chariot. All the chariots were made to the same specification. Their wheels wore ruts into the roads. The width of the chariot wheels needed to accommodate the widest part of the horses, the hindquarters. And the first English railways were built to be the same size as old tramways, which were the same size as the ruts. The builders used the same jigs in railway construction that they did in building the tram wagons. The tram wagon wheels were set at 4 feet 8.5 inches, so that they would fit into the ruts of those old long-distance roads. When the American railroads were built, they were built by the English expatriates to the same spacing, 4 feet 8.5 inches wide. When the rocket boosters were manufactured in Utah, they had to be shipped to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida via the railway. So the boosters couldn't be any wider than the standard gauge railways, 4 foot 8.5 inches wide. And that is the end of Moments with Mary for now. We had a complicated last year, following no driving at all the year before in 2020. At the end of last season, we were asked to submit a synopsis of our year to the Carriage Driving Annual Awards, the Carriage Driving Magazine Annual Awards. The following is the piece that I sent. I had imagined that our fun day had been able to happen, and it might have been based around Only Fools and Horses, so I wrote using quotes from that show. Go faster is one of the phrases Ron can clearly articulate when he's out driving our RDA Cob Prince. Faster, he adds, turning to me as if it is I that need the extra impulsion. Prince is less than impressed at pulling us along than more than a slow trot. He's coming to the end of his working life, and he needs more enticement than Ron's plaintive, please. that the breeze carries up to the skylarks and over to the jagged outline of the Benahee range of hills that lie at the very centre of our county of Aberdeenshire. After 18 months of lull, the RDA Association began to encourage groups to restart. COVID regulations, antibacterial barriers, masks, antiviral barriers that should be, masks and signage required an overhaul of our group. It was hard going. Mike, a Ben-Hur who has been with us since he left riding at the Camp Hill community, had his 50th birthday postponed last year, and he'd hoped for a celebration this year. However, because of COVID, we were still not allowed to share a cake, and there was definitely no candles. No blowing out of candles. But Mike presented the group with a papier-mâché horse, which we welcomed and hung on a wall. But even that horse's face looked sad. Perhaps it was all too difficult. Some positive things happened towards the end of the season. 3 new volunteers turned up with such good skills they seemed to fit right into our eclectic group. Raquel says, "Derek, will you get it into your thick skull? I'm not trying to meet intelligent and sensitive people. I'm happy with you." We may only have been fools and horses, but we have survived a difficult time by using the skills and friendships we have in a continued attempt to improve lives. We've been shortlisted, and next week at the Carriage Driving Magazine's ceremony, next week, hopefully it won't all go Chateau Neuf de Pape. The last word should go to the other Elizabeth. It seems we're ahead of the curve referencing Del Boy. There's a whole lot of plates that have been produced that say, to commemorate the golden jubilee of Queen Elizabeth, which just shows how quickly anything can go Chateau Neuf de Pape. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, I think you provide a lot of memories for us, and we're just sitting here reminiscing in our own heads now as to what's going on, and it's great, you brought up things and you're just thinking, oh, I remember that. Brilliant.
I think it's wonderful just to hear, because I really enjoyed the moments with Mary at the start of every meeting, because it added another dimension to us coming to enjoy the
I suppose when new people come, we need to have an environment of inclusion perfectly timed. I mean, perfectly timed.
Well, it's the nephew, I think, or grandson of the person that we got Ricky from.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So where is it coming up from?
Cumbria.
Oh, wow. That is just the very, very best news for Prince. That's a very good start, isn't it? To see
But Prince is still, he did very well at the weekend at the,
Yeah.
you know, he's, for some reason he seems to be, he's never going to let the world go fire anymore, but he's certainly got an awful lot that he can still do, you know, he has done an awful lot, and we may have to semi-retire him from next season, and maybe put him onto lighter duties, but there's absolutely no reason why Prince, the way he's going, there was concerns last year about him, but in actual fact, having seen him at the weekend,
Well, of course, outside, I remember when we drove an event in England, it's on fire, but it's like all of us.
That's right.
Day-to-day chores, we're a bit bored.
yeah.
And we just go, that field again,